What could be hidden inside the caves of the Grand Canyon, and why has the US government restricted access to some of them? One of the major reasons is that native tribes asked the US government to protect certain caves and sacred places inside the canyon from outsiders. But while researching why these places were so important, I realized the biggest mystery isn't what's inside the caves. It's the being the Hopi believed was already here when their ancestors arrived. The native tribes have lived around the Grand Canyon for thousands of years. Yet, according to their own traditions, this was never truly their land. They believed their ancestors arrived here thousands of years ago and inherited this land from someone else. Their stories seem to describe the journey of the earliest humans, how they reached the Grand Canyon, and what they did inside these caves. So let's go back to the very beginning. Around 42,000 years ago, there was a major catastrophic event known as the Adams Event. During this time, Earth's magnetic shield dropped below 6% of its current strength, allowing extreme cosmic radiation to enter Earth's atmosphere. At the same time, solar radiation increased, causing the upper ozone layer to be stripped away. Because of this, extreme cosmic and UV radiation began affecting humans and many other species on Earth. Extreme UV radiation can cause severe skin burns and blisters within hours of exposure. It can also damage the eyes and cause skin cancer. The event also caused widespread wildfires across many forests. Because of this, many humans began sheltering in caves until the event had passed. Now, the Adams event is real, it actually happened, and around 40,000 years ago, archaeologists found that human cave dwelling suddenly increased. It appears that humans began living in caves in much larger numbers and across many different regions. The Adams event is just the scientific name we use today. But if a human living through it had to describe what happened, they would probably just say their world ended by fire. And that's exactly what the Hopi tribe says. They say that long ago their world was peaceful until it was destroyed by fire, forcing them to live inside caves where the ant people helped them survive. According to the Hopi, this was only the beginning of the journey that eventually led their ancestors to the Grand Canyon. The people who survived the fire eventually came out of the caves. For the first time in years, they could walk again under an open sky. But survival was far from over. They had no villages, no farms, and no food stored for the future. They had to find fresh water, hunt whatever animals they could, build shelters, and slowly rebuild everything they had lost. That's what we humans have always done. No matter how harsh the world becomes, we adapt, we learn, and sooner or later, we start over. Little by little, life became normal again. And according to the Hopi, that's exactly what happened. After the First World ended, only a few people survived. They entered a new world where everything was different. The land was different, the plants were different, and they had to build a new life from nothing. But just as humanity began to recover, another catastrophe arrived. This time, it wasn't fire, it was ice. Nearly 20,000 years after the Adams event, the Ice Age reached its peak. Massive glaciers covered huge parts of the northern hemisphere. Temperatures dropped dramatically, and many forests and grasslands disappeared. The animals humans depended on either migrated or died out. Human populations declined, and the small groups that survived were forced to keep moving in search of places where they could live. Some estimates suggest that the human population dropped to only a few thousand breeding individuals. And once again, the Hopi describe it almost the same way. They say Their second world was eventually destroyed by ice, forcing the survivors to leave everything behind and begin their journey once again. Around 20,000 years ago, while the Ice Age still covered much of the northern hemisphere, some of the ancestors of Native Americans were living in a massive land called Beringia. Today, this land is underwater, but back then it connected Siberia and Alaska, allowing humans to travel into North America. For thousands of years, people lived there, but once again, their world was about to change. A few thousand years later, as the Ice Age came to an end, the massive ice sheets began melting, because of which sea levels kept rising, and little by little, the land they had called home started disappearing beneath the ocean. Eventually, Beringia was completely submerged. And again, the Hopi describe something similar. They say their third world was destroyed by a great flood. Now here's where the story becomes interesting. According to the Hopi, after the flood, their ancestors emerged into the fourth world. Archaeologists describe a similar journey in a very different way. They believe the ancestors of today's Native Americans left Beringia and gradually spread across North and South America. The Hopi say that after entering the fourth world, their ancestors emerged into the Grand Canyon, where they encountered a mysterious being named Masao. Masao allowed them to live on this land, but only if they respected and followed the responsibilities he gave them. Even today, the Hopi and several other native tribes continue to regard certain caves, springs, and places within the Grand Canyon as sacred. Some of these places are still used for ceremonies and rituals, and many remain protected because their traditions do not allow them to be shared with outsiders. And that's why I think the real mystery of the Grand Canyon was never the story of Egyptian tombs. If such tombs had existed, we would expect the Spanish and other explorers like John Wesley Powell, H.R. Worth, Frank Waters, or many others who documented the canyon over the last few centuries to have mentioned them. But they didn't. Instead, almost every historical record kept leading back to the same people and to the same story that had been preserved for generations. Now, all of this could simply be a coincidence. The Hopi never describe these events exactly the same way science does, and I'm not saying they do. I'm only sharing this because I found the similarities too interesting to ignore. The Adams event really happened, the Ice Age really happened, Beringia really existed, and it eventually disappeared beneath the sea. Genetic studies also show that the ancestors of almost all Native American peoples came from ancient populations in Northeast Asia before migrating into the America. That part of the story is supported by archaeology and DNA. The Hopi traditions I shared are taken from the writings of Frank Waters and the accounts recorded by earlier researchers. But there was still one part of the story that stood out to me: the being who gave them this land. According to the Hopi, after entering the fourth world, their ancestors met Masao, who allowed them to live on this land and taught them how they should live. But what's fascinating is that the Hopi aren't the only people with a story like this. Across different cultures around the world, we keep finding stories about mysterious beings who appeared after great catastrophes and shared knowledge, wisdom, and the skills people needed to begin again. Now the question is, who were these beings? And why do so many ancient cultures remember them after great catastrophes? Thousands of miles away in Indonesia, local Sundanese traditions also speak of mysterious beings who shared knowledge and wisdom with their ancestors. I made an entire video exploring that mystery. You can watch it next.